Thanks for coming to our Caregiver's Guide to Social Emotional Learning. We're so grateful that you're here to join us. We have a robust conversation and a couple of dynamic panelists to present today. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into introductions. I'm Jess Corinne. I'm Head of Educational Services. I started as a classroom teacher and then throughout the last 20 years have served as an executive director, regional manager for Linda Mood Val. And then also I opened my own private practice in the Bay Area. And now I'm with Learnfully and I'm so glad to be here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic to Sheila and she can introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Sheila Murphy. I am an educational consultant, but prior to that I was a school principal. Prior to that I was a classroom teacher. I had 3 kids and they were the ones who really got me into education. So when they had their learning struggles, social emotional learning was really what I think paved the way for them to become successful adults. And so that is really my area of focus in my life and academic coaching and educational consultant work.
Great, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to hear. Our next panelist is Sneha, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I am Sneha, as you heard, and I am a mentor and youth empowerment coach. So I work with kids to help them feel more confident in their educational and life experiences. And prior to my private practice doing this, I have been both in and out of the classroom as an educational therapist, as a classroom teacher, as the assistant teacher, as an administrator. I have held a number of roles in education over the course of about 10 plus years. And I've also gone through the American school system, and I have seen firsthand and experienced firsthand the gaps that need to be filled. And that's what brought me to Learnfully today.
Thanks so much. Happy to have you. Let's go ahead and get started. So we've given our introductions. I'll provide you with a brief overview into Learnfully and our mission. We will also introduce social emotional learning and just give you a broad stroke understanding of why we're here today. And then we'll go ahead and open the floor for questions and answers with our panelists. I welcome any and all questions that arise. If you don't mind dropping those in the chat. We have quite a dynamic conversation. So we will make sure that if we don't get to those at the end of the presentation, we will circle back with you and ensure that you have your answers that you need and deserve. So let's go ahead and get started. Learnfully is a personalized platform that is on a mission to empower neurodiversity and support their families. We have a dynamic and high quality network of educational specialists near and far who have credentialing and certification in multisensory evidence-based programming and the personality to engage learners both online and some in person. We are constantly building out our content to ensure that we can provide our network, our community with the support that they need, but also to allow our learners to continue to experience the magic of learning through the reinforcers that we create as a team. We are continuously providing feedback. We pride ourselves on having proactive communication in place to ensure that our parents feel supported and have the coaching and mentoring and tips and tricks they need to continue the momentum that we engage throughout session and build upon that strong foundation, helping learners to realize and reach their strong learning potential. We take a multisensory approach to learning. We absolutely pride ourselves again on this idea of incorporating strengths and interests to ensure that our learners feel engaged, feel seen, feel heard. And so we are constantly assessing the learner profile, if you will, to ensure that we're meeting our learners' needs by delivering instruction in the way that they best receive it. So some of our learners are auditory learners where they learn best by hearing through audiobooks, podcasts, orations, and so forth, discussions. Some are visual learners, well, they do best by seeing graphics, visualizing content. They're able to take snapshots of pictures presented to them and recall that information by tapping into their visual sense. And then also, of course, a lot of our learners, to be honest, are a combination of these 3. And part of that combination is a kinesthetic approach, where they learn best through hands-on multisensory dynamic instruction by having some movement, some manipulatives, and so forth. And so, I mean, I will say that our learner styles constantly shifting and evolving as they age, their needs change. So that's why we tend to look at the learner as a whole and not just as their individual skill set. So just a broad stroke overview of social emotional learning before we fully dive into the questions of our panelists. There are 5 key component skills within social emotional learning, and we'll expand upon these as we discuss and proceed. The main aspects of this is awareness. So social awareness, self-awareness, using metacognition or learning how they learn best, and using that to manage, to regulate, to ensure that they're making the decisions that are sound and safe for them as a learner and as a whole. As we proceed, you'll notice that a lot of these aspects affect their life on a grand scale in many ways. So it can impact their ability to identify in a healthy manner, to be able to achieve their goals, to follow through, to really execute upon their potential, and again, to make responsible decisions as they progress through their childhood and beyond. So as you can imagine, social emotional learning doesn't just impact learners in their childhood, but it impacts them throughout their life trajectory. So we want to secure and ensure that we're putting them on a positive path towards their potential by not just seeing learners through an academic lens, but also through a social and emotional lens. So let's get started. I'm super excited. Let's dive in. The first question is for Sheila. And of course, Neha, as you have insight, you can always pitch in and give us feedback. But the first one is, how has the pandemic impacted social emotional skills, Sheila?
Yeah, so some of the ways that I know the pandemic has affected students differently is that, a number of them have had opportunities to venture out with parents, opportunities to explore nature. They've had pods that they've hung out with, so they've gotten some social interaction. Well, some families have been indoors and had to stay real close with family and siblings, and that's it. So some households also had lots of structure going on and kept an academic pace, while others kind of had things a little more loosey-goosey. So, in turn, some of the relationships were created to be stronger. Some of them have become a little strained at this point, to be honest. So all of these things are going to really impact how students show up back at school in the fall, and also how their behavior and interactions with the adults are happening right now. So some of the things that could potentially happen when school starts back is that some students could start showing signs of school avoidance or anxiety. This could show up in things like separation anxiety, suspicious sick days, lots of tummy aches, headaches, mysterious concerns, start being a little paranoid about things of somebody being sick or dying or ill or not being around, be just kind of emotional changes, disruptive behavior. All of these things can start showing up as signs of some social emotional skills being unbalanced. So it's really important for caregivers, to pay attention to these things, and also to kind of check in on their own social emotional well-being. How are they feeling? Are they feeling separation anxiety as they return? Prepare to go back to school. So really taking a pulse on their own well-being and social emotional areas that they're feeling maybe a struggle with, and then ensuring that they're not projecting these things onto their kiddos, and then just being really sensitive and paying attention to what are some maybe red flags or different behaviors that the kids are having that they hadn't had previously, since going either back to school or back even into public as the masks mandate is loosened up and we're going into a lot of different social interactions that we haven't done before. So really paying attention to things that are behaviors that you haven't seen in the past. It's really important. Mm-hmm.
I imagine that this year, in addition to last year, we're seeing quite an uptick in anxiety across the board, regardless of age. So I imagine that any transition is going to be a struggle for our learners. And so that's such great insight, is to look for some of those behaviors that we haven't seen before. And especially as we get closer to going back to school, because we're kind of in this decompression, relaxed state right now. So you might not see it until we turn the corner closer to the school year.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Sheila. That's super helpful. So what are some of these early indicators of social emotional challenges? I mean, of course, considering the pandemic, but just in general, what are some signs that parents such as myself should look out for when it comes to social emotional health?
So going back to your 5 indicators or 5 areas of social emotional challenges, we kind of rethink about those. Number 1, the foundational piece is self-awareness. So when students are lacking self-awareness, this could show up by being aggressive or demanding, kind of egotistical, outside of course, the normal age where ego is how they operate. Remember, these are all age-appropriate behaviors that we want to pay attention to. But bossy, confrontational, if they aren't stopping to take stock of their own feelings and just being very reactionary, that's when you know that there's a lack of self-awareness. They're not stopping to say, I'm angry right now, and I'm angry because my brother took my toy, and we could share, or voicing what the feelings are and how they can support what they need to support them to move into a more relational area. So these are the self-awareness, is really just being aware of how am I feeling right now. The next is self-management. So they might know they're angry. If they start hitting, they aren't managing their emotions. So it's okay to have these feelings, but are we taking these feelings and managing them appropriately? In other words, communicating them out. So if they are behaving impulsively, if they're very resistant to change, even behaving slowly or unresponsibly, that could be a sign of self-management challenges. If they are lacking empathy, being critical, picky, fussy, making poor decisions, these are kinds of things that you'll see in someone who's really struggling with self-management. So these things are going to impede the relationship building. So we always want to support students in these areas, because you won't even get to the next areas of building relationship if they're struggling in the first 2 areas. So the social awareness and social management, those areas would hardly come into play, because nobody wants to be around these kind of kiddos when they're behaving this way. So if you're noticing people don't want to play with your kids, it could be they are behaving outwardly instead of internalizing appropriate behaviors. So really important for parents to help model what are appropriate relationship building skills, what are appropriate communication skills, how can we help have an open mind, these kinds of things, to ensure that our kids are thinking about the world in a more open way, and looking at solutions to their problems, not melting down because there are problems.
Right. Absolutely activating that growth mindset, and also being able to, which is really challenging, I would assume, for a lot of these learners, to be able to see themselves in the world around them. They kind of see themselves through their own lens, and they can't take a step back and analyze their behaviors on a grander scale. So that's,
and especially post-pandemic, because they may have been in the house with the only child or 2 children, and a number of adults, maybe not just 2 adults in the house, maybe more than that. And so they had the full attention of the adults in the room. Or they have none. It could be the other way. They had no adults in the room and they were doing their thing.
Right.
So these things will lead to the challenges if they didn't have to think about responsible decision making. They were just doing either what they were told, or they were doing whatever they wanted. These are all things that now may need to be recalibrated.
That's a great segue to our next question, actually, is can you walk us through a few simple strategies? You mentioned modeling, absolutely. desired behavior, appropriate behavior for each age. What are just a couple other strategies that you might recommend us parents utilize in the household to really shape some of the social emotional health?
Yeah, modeling appropriate behavior and reinforcing good behavior is absolutely a strategy that is number one, because I think that oftentimes the parents, the do as I say, not as I do kind of thing does not work. Kids are brilliant and they can definitely see through that. So that's really important. Communication, teaching them the words to use that will help them when they are feeling like there's a huge problem or frustration. There's a website called Size of the Problem. How big is this problem? Is it a little problem? Is it a big problem? How can we break it into pieces? So giving those strategies and skills about whatever the meltdown might be. Look for activities that teach cooperation. It's so important. Game playing is really important to teach them how to lose, teach them how to interact when things aren't going their way. And games are a great way for that to happen. And if they do win, have the conversation around, how do you think your friend felt? Were they happy for you? That's great. Were they upset? Why do you think that is? And have those conversations about all perspective, how the other person might have felt. Teaching empathy by encouraging kids to talk about how other people feel is really important. And talking about their own feelings also, through story time. If you do stories, reading books in the evening, you could talk about the perspective of other characters in the book. How do you think that one felt? Having those conversations, because those will give the awareness that hopefully at some point they will internalize and use for themselves.
That's great. I really appreciate that insight. And you're never too old to storytell and utilize social stories and narrations, which I believe Sneha has some insight into. As a practitioner, you've worked with many learners who struggle with social emotional learning, executive functioning, perspective taking, and problem solving. How do you formulate a plan as a coach and a mentor?
Absolutely. So I actually, when it comes to formulating a plan, I kind of, as you might say, tailor it to my student, to my child, because no student is identical, right? So what I would encourage my students to do is I would say, okay, I want you to, here's a journal, here's a notebook. Anytime you're feeling any type of emotion, I want you to write it down. I want you to write down all your thoughts, everything that's going on in your heart, in your mind, wherever it is. Go ahead and write it down. Try to put it into words. It does not have to be perfect. It's not going to be graded. And I use read alouds. And when I say read alouds, I mean books that discuss tricky subjects. And when you're with your student for long enough, you get to know them quite well. So sometimes that's a teaching moment where you don't pry, but you share the experience of another. And this can be a fictional or realistic character from which they can draw upon, and they can be inspired by their actions. And then I would, of course, urge them to manage their emotions. And I would say, when you're feeling sad, what are some tips and tricks that we could do, which Sheila mentioned earlier? When you're happy, how can we really stay in the moment, stay present? For all of the emotions, our kids need to learn how to be present in these emotions, right? Not to act impulsively, but to take some time to breathe and to consider, why is it that I'm upset right now? Why is it that I'm happy right now? Why is it that I'm sad or angry? And it's really up to us to show them, as Sheila mentioned earlier, to show them and lead by example. So if you're not having the best of days, if you are having the best of days, share this with them and walk them through your emotions, because it's really important for our kids to see us succeed and fail as well, right? We never want to show them this perfect exterior, because then they may feel like they can never come to you if they're not doing very well. But if they see that you are human and you are capable of not only falling but rising as well, it's very, very helpful. I would also really encourage you to give your student, your child, responsibilities and say, and just when you notice that they have more energy, or they want some more attention, they want some validation, ask them, hey, I really need your help taking out the trash. I would love your help cooking dinner. Or I would love it if you took this responsibility on. It's just you, maybe help with the dog, or, clean up the house, or what have you. Really just make them feel like they have a sense of accomplishment, because once
Yeah.
they are able to understand their part in it, they'll feel like, wow, my parents, my family really values my input. And that goes such a long way, because our kids only want to make us happy. That's all they want. And of course, practice problem solving skills, right? When things don't go their way, when you do that little debrief after school, it's really up to you to help them navigate that situation. Because sometimes a heavy heart, if they feel like, oh my gosh, it just didn't go my way and I didn't win, if you can teach them how to live and lose with grace and kindness, and think, how can I grow from this? It's a much better attitude versus you must win all the time. You have to get 100% all the time, because that pressure, even though you tell them that that's your best, if there are moments where they feel like that's not their best and they feel like you would never understand, they may carry out their own solutions, and it may not be in a positive manner. So really, I would encourage you to just practice different problem solving skills with your young person, so that they slowly grow to understand that sometimes things won't go my way, but sometimes things will. And in both situations, there is a way to respond, right? Because when things go some way for you, they may not be going well for others as well. So it's really important to make sure they understand the difference. And again, this is going to happen throughout their lives, but right now, while you are their main source of knowledge, aside from their educators at school, it's really important for us all to work as a team.
I love that. Yeah, we call them work jobs here at my house, and I have 4 children myself, and it really makes them feel like they have ownership, and like you said, they have feelings of success and productivity, but they also know that we can't operate as a family unit without their support and their help. So I really love that you highlighted that as one of the tips, and I appreciate it. Last but not last, this is second to last. So how do you generalize these skills? So if you plant the seeds, you model these behaviors, you give them opportunity in front of you as the caregiver to really work through some of their emotions and awareness and so forth. How do you ensure that they carry that over into all environments?
Well, what I do is, when I tell my kids, is that you are my legacy. So I tell them that, just like with me, with my parents and my family, the way that they raised me is that even though I'm an adult and I'm in my own home, the way that I behave with the rest of the world, that is a representation of how I was raised. That's a representation of the teachers that I've had throughout my life, of the adults that have been in my life, of the friends that I spend time with. So if I'm acting poorly in society, then, oh my gosh, shame on me, because I was taught better. So same thing goes for our kids. We need to show them that, hey, we've gone through it as well, right? So when they're in the community, when they're at a friend's house, when they're with their grandparents, or when they're with, other friends or teachers or school events or what have you, you tell them and you say, listen, it's not about being afraid to tell me or being afraid for me to find out. It's really about you representing yourself well. It's about carrying yourself with grace, because you never know who might see something special in you, and you want people to see the good in you always, and you want them to see you trying always and to have a kind heart. And we really need to spend more time emphasizing these characteristics with our kids when they're not with us, right? Because if we're standing behind them, policing them all the time, they might do it out of fear because they're afraid mom or dad or whoever is going to find out. But when they're out and about, they need to understand why they're doing this. They're doing this because they are members of society. And if they want others to treat them well, then they also should treat others well. And they should act with grace, kindness, understanding, what have you. And, just whatever values you hold true to yourself and your family, really make sure that your kids understand that these are skills that will help you throughout life, not just as a member of this family, but in their social world, in their professional world. And I know that for kids that can feel like forever and such a long time, but really it's important to make them understand that time flies by. Because if you think about it, COVID is now slowly, it's not really over ever, but we're coexisting with it. And we thought this day would never come. So we need them to understand that things will come a lot faster than they think. And within a blink of an eye, you never want to go back and think, oh my gosh, I treated this person with with anger, and that wasn't okay, because we all have those moments of reflection. So really give our
Right.
kids the time to take ownership of their actions, and just let them know, hey, you're representing not only yourself but everyone who worked hard to make sure that you had all the tools possible to be successful in this life. So it's really
I
up to
totally
you how
agree.
you want to agree. Yes.
Yeah, and as a parent, as a teacher mom myself, I think it really does take a village, as you both have mentioned, and ensuring that the teachers also feel as if they have input and a voice in the process, that there's some consistency. If, for example, one of my children is working on a specific skill, ensuring that there's proactive and clear communication between them. Because, kids are going to make mistakes. It's absolutely fine, but it's how you respond as a caregiver and an educator that matters and goes the distance. So I would just add to everything you said is to ensure that the educators also know exactly what you're working on, or at least give them the space to provide insight and feedback if they're seeing some of the same signs of social emotional challenges, so that you can have like a consistency in place and the learner feels supported from every channel, every angle. I think
Oh,
that's
absolutely. Absolutely, Jess.
so
Thank you
helpful.
for mentioning that. I think that relationship is very, very crucial, because if parents feel like they have a say in what's happening, and if teachers feel like they have a say in what's happening, we're all a unit, and we all need to be
Yeah.
together, because we're a team when it comes to raising these kids.
Yeah.
It takes a village, as you said.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Well, okay. So in final thoughts, I would just be curious to hear from each of you. What is one thing you wish that parents knew going into this journey that would come? What's one wish that you want to just plant the seed of insight to rest them assured? Sheila, you can start off if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think communicate. I think it's really important that that you communicate with the teachers in the school, or anyone, any caregiver that is working alongside your student, to share what are the struggles and what you're doing. What are some wins that you've had at home, or what are some wins that they've had in the school setting? Because you're not going to have a skill that is mastered or generalized if it's only happening in one place or another. That means the student hasn't mastered the skill. So if you have a skill that you're trying to work on, it's really important to communicate. And or if a teacher comes to you and says your child is struggling with this thing, have a set of strategies that maybe they can give you a suggestion about, or research. I mean, the internet is at our fingertips now, literally, and it's really helpful to learn about things that you didn't even know existed. And having those two-way street communication will support your child and help them to understand that these things happen in all different settings. So it's very important to be kind and courteous, or empathetic, or optimistic. All of these things are very, very important in all settings. And so to help them to understand that, it has to happen in all different settings. And so that's really important. Use something that your kid's already good at, and so you can build off of that. You know how you're really good with your siblings? Well, when you go to school, you have to do that same thing. So giving them something to anchor the skill to. And I think it's really important to don't try to fix everything at once. Work on one skill, work on one piece. If it's sharing, work on the sharing and measure. How many times did you see your child share with their brother or sister? Or how many times did the teacher notice that they were sharing in the classroom? And see if you can improve that skill. Or how many temper tantrums, if there were 10, make it 8 the next week and 7 the next week. So if you're measuring it, you see progress, then you're rewarding that, and you're having the communication. What happened differently today that helped you get through this day? And you're communicating with the child, because they know better than anyone what helps them. Sometimes adults forget to communicate with the kids and ask, what is the best strategy that you're most comfortable with, and where are the challenges coming in? So I think if I had to pare it down, just pick one skill at a time, communicate with the teacher, and measure their progress so you can reward the great behavior that they're mastering.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's really important to keep in mind this whole idea of small steps to big goals. I say it often, it's tried and true, and it works wonders. That when you don't inundate, right, you can really hyper focus. I'll use that term loosely, on the productivity and positivity thereof. So I appreciate that, Sheila. Thank you. And Sneha, any final thoughts as to what you wish caregivers would know starting out in this journey?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Sheila. You covered all the notes. But one thing that I would add just to supplement is, as Sheila mentioned, really just speaking to your child, giving them input in what's going on. And I would really take that further and say, hear your child out. Sometimes you need to learn how to read between the lines when they're having an outburst or they're upset or whatever is going on. You get a call from school. Before hearing the school out, I mean, of course, hear the school out as your parent, that's your job, but at the same time, hear your child out. Teach them how to build different strategies, right? To build a toolbox to handle that frustration, and then take it one step further and teach them how to advocate for themselves when they're not getting their way, when they're not getting what they want, or their messaging isn't coming across properly, right? As many of us have mentioned today, communication, communication, communication. Teaching your student, your child, how to communicate with their teachers, with you, with anyone when things are just a little bit frustrating is really an important skill set to have. And especially if they're experiencing higher levels of anxiety or aggression or just uncertainty, right, which is so common and which should be expected going back to school after a year of being at home.
Yeah.
We really need to show that we're more empathetic to them, and we can't just tell them, well, just get over it, because sometimes we need to, before telling them that, hear them out, let them have a platform to speak and explain where they're coming from, and then try to disseminate and say, okay, well, maybe we can work with this one aspect of it and we can go from there. I can't promise you everything, but maybe we can try with this one thing, so that at least they feel like, as Sheila mentioned, they have a little bit of a buy-in. Because if they don't feel like they have a buy-in and you're just controlling them, that's a path that you do not want to embark on, because it can really be a struggle. And especially in today's day and age, kids are dealing with so much, and it's only going to increase. So really having that bond of fluidity where kids feel like they can share their peace of mind with you in an eloquent manner, that's a skill that will benefit not only them, but you as well, and others who come to interact with them.
Absolutely. I think we could all benefit from that. And really, to second your point, this idea of seeing behavior as a symptom, right? So reading into their behaviors as something deeper, like you said, letting them communicate. They're communicating through those behaviors as well. So I think you both said it brilliantly. To ensure communication is in place, model that communication, and see every behavior as a symptom of the need for support and seeking out that resource that you serve as a caregiver. So thank you both so much. This was extremely helpful for me as a parent, and I'm sure for others. We will briefly go over our process, but I just want to thank you both for giving us insight. We do like to take into account and consideration a caregiver's lens, just like we've said throughout this presentation. So we start with a caregiver questionnaire, and some of that does involve a social, emotional health, executive functioning, academic wins, interests, strengths, and then we do an assessment to really pinpoint where the breakdown may be happening. And I use the term assessment a little bit loosely. I mean, we look at building blocks, the underlying skills. We also look at some validated measures in critical thinking, conceptual understanding, math, literacy, and writing, to really make sure that we're then pairing them and matching them with an appropriate educational specialist. So if any of you watching have a learner, or a learner in your classroom even, who is struggling with some of these aspects of how to access their potential, we want to hear from you first, and then we'll meet your learner and ensure that we're matching them appropriately based on experience and rapport. We have many programs. We have multi-tiered programs. We have intensive remediation. We have enrichment that we can tap into over the summer into the school year as well, of course. And then our Rise and Shine program is it's a summer boost. We look at really reviewing the top concepts from the previous year, and then front loading or previewing information that's to come, to ensure that your learner enters the classroom with that added sense of bravado, but also so that it reduces the anxiety they may feel about having to be on stage and perform, as we've been discussing. So feel free to reach out, look into our website, call us, email us, whatever is appropriate to ensure you get the information you need. Again, I am so grateful to each of you for sharing your knowledge. I feel like it's of great benefit, and I can't wait to host another one sometime soon. Thank you everyone for joining us. We welcome any questions to follow. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.